So what's in a name? Sometimes a whole lot more than you'd think. Today, we're going to unravel a really fascinating historical thread that ties together a world-famous statesman, a city you've probably never thought about, and a warship that's become pure legend. They all share the same name, Bismarck, but how they're all connected, well, that's the real story. I mean, just think about it for a second. What on earth could link a 19th century German chancellor, a state capital sitting way out on the American plains, and one of the most famous battleships of the Second World War? It seems totally random, right? The connection is the name, obviously, but why they all share it, that's the puzzle we're here to piece together. And it all kicks off with this guy, Otto von Bismarck. They called him the Iron Chancellor, and for good reason. He was an absolute giant of 19th century politics, a brilliant and honestly pretty ruthless operator who basically dragged the modern German nation into existence through sheer force of will. Then you have this place, Bismarck, North Dakota. Yeah, it's a state capital, but it's thousands of miles from Germany, smack dab in the middle of the American prairie. So how does a city like that get named after a European political powerhouse? It feels like there's no connection at all. And finally, we've got the machine, the German battleship Bismarck. Its name brings up one of the most incredible and tragic stories in naval history. It's a tale of power, of pride, and a desperate, epic hunt that has become the stuff of movies and books. All right, so to understand how the name got so famous, you have to start with the man himself. Let's dig in and figure out who Otto von Bismarck really was, and how he got so famous that people were naming cities and battleships after him long after he was gone. To really get Bismarck, you need to understand this one word, realpolitik. Basically, it means politics based on what's practical and possible, not on some grand ideology or moral crusade. For Bismarck, the only thing that mattered was making his home state, Prussia, stronger. And he was going to use whatever it took to get there, be it deals, trickery, or straight-up war. And this quote, it's him in a nutshell. He said this to a parliament that was trying to block his plans for the army. He was basically telling them, look, your debates are nice and all, but they don't build nations. He believed real power, the kind that forges an empire, comes from the barrel of a gun. It wasn't just a cool line. It was his entire game plan. And he wasn't bluffing. Just look at this timeline. It's like a masterclass in calculated aggression. In just 7 years, he deliberately started 3 short, sharp wars. Each one was a perfectly planned move. First, a little war against Denmark to warm up the army. Then, a bigger one to kick his rival, Austria, out of the picture. And finally, a war with France to scare all the smaller German states into uniting under Prussia. It was risky, it was brilliant, and it worked like a charm. But here is where the story takes a fascinating turn. Once he got what he wanted, once Germany was a single, unified nation in 1871, Bismarck's entire job description flipped. The guy who built an empire with iron and blood now knew his #1 priority was to protect that empire. The master war maker had to become Europe's top peacemaker. You really have to see his career in 2 parts. Before 71, he was the guy shaking everything up. After 71, he was the guy trying to keep everything stable. He knew Germany was now what they called a satisfied power. It had what it wanted, and another big European war was the last thing he needed. It could undo everything he'd built. So his new mission was simple: keep the peace, whatever it takes. I love this description from his own king. Juggling on horseback. It perfectly captures what Bismarck had to do for the next 20 years. Imagine trying to keep all these powerful, jealous empires, Russia, Austria-Hungary, Britain, from attacking each other, all while making sure a very angry France couldn't find any allies for a revenge war. It was this incredibly delicate, complicated act that pretty much only he could pull off. So his strategy became this dizzying web of treaties and alliances. The main goal? Keep France totally alone, boxed in with no one to team up with. By making sure all the big deals in Europe ran through him in Berlin, he basically became the continent's referee. And you know what? It worked. For 2 decades, his system kept Europe from tearing itself apart. So by the end of the 19th century, Bismarck wasn't just some politician. He was a global icon, a symbol of strength, of genius, of political power. His name had become a brand. And that brings us right back to our original puzzles. Okay, let's solve the first mystery, the city. It still seems so weird. Why name a town in North Dakota after a German guy? Well, the answer isn't about honoring him or his politics. It's about something way more American, making a buck. And there you have it. The place was originally called Edwinton, but the railroad company building a line through it had a brilliant idea. They renamed it Bismarck as a pure marketing play. They figured the famous name would attract German immigrants to come settle the land, and even better, get rich Germans back home to invest in their railroad project. It was just an ad campaign. So, mystery number 1 is solved. It was about money. But what about the battleship? Launched in 1939, it was definitely named to make people think of the Iron Chancellor and the powerful empire he created. But was the ship itself really as tough as the man? And this is where the myth and the reality of the battleship kind of pull apart. We have this image of it as this invincible sea monster, but the truth is a little more complicated. If you just look at the stats, its main guns actually threw less weight in a single broadside than many of its rivals. Newer ships from Britain, France, and even Italy packed a bigger punch on paper, so it wasn't necessarily the top dog. Okay, so if it wasn't the biggest or the most powerful ship out there, why is it so incredibly famous? Why does everyone, even people who know nothing about naval history, know the name Bismarck? The answer isn't in the blueprints. It's in the story. The battleship is famous for the exact same reason the man is, the sheer drama of its life. Its one and only combat mission was pure Hollywood. You have this daring escape into the open ocean, the shocking moment it sinks the legendary HMS Hood, and then this epic, desperate chase across the entire North Atlantic by the Royal Navy. The ship's legend was built on its story, not its statistics. So what do we have? A city named for marketing, and a ship named to invoke a myth. Both of them point back to the powerful, messy, and complicated legacy of the man himself. So let's try to sum him up. This quote from historian Jonathan Steinberg just hits the nail on the head. Bismarck wasn't just a part of history. He bent it to his will. He literally redrew the map of Europe. And he did it by telling everyone what he was going to do, and then, against all odds, just doing it. But his legacy is just full of these incredible contradictions. He's the guy who created a nation but hated democracy. The ultimate conservative who created the world's first welfare state, not out of kindness, but to steal thunder from the socialists. The war starter who became the great peacemaker. He was a walking paradox, and you can't really understand him if you try to put him in just one box. So, what's in a name? In the case of Bismarck, it's a business plan, a war story, and the massive shadow of one brilliant, controversial man. The story of these 3 Bismarcks shows you how history really works. A person becomes a legend, and that legend becomes a tool, a brand you can use to sell railroad tickets or to name your most powerful warship. It really makes you wonder which of today's names will end up meaning something completely different 100 years from now. Thanks for watching.